Pierre Poilievre is a man of his word. He believes profoundly in opportunity and the promise of this country. He believes that hard work should be rewarded, and he intends to deliver. He served for 7 terms as a member of Parliament. He's gotten elected 7 times. He served as a cabinet minister in Stephen Harper's government. He's got the experience, he's got the know-how. And he knows that you know how to run your own life, and he wants to make sure that you can do that again, and this is the freest country on the planet. And he stole my favorite line. Pierre, I guarantee you, will turn the hurt into hope once again. So without any further ado, I'd like to call him out because he is an incredible speaker. You all know that. We need to make sure we win this riding right here in Timmins, and I know you're going to help us do that. And so without any further ado, please welcome my dear friend, the leader of His Majesty's official opposition and the next Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Poilievre.
Thank you very much, Timmins. Great to be back. This is my 3rd time in Timmins in less than 12 months. Wow. Fantastic. In fact, I'm told that I'm seen more in Timmins than your local MP, Charlie Angus. He's busy hanging out with his boss, Justin Trudeau, in Ottawa, right? Well, we realize that you, the people who do the work, who work hard, pay your taxes, and play by the rules, you're the boss in this country, and that's the way it's going to be when I'm Prime Minister. It's great to have Scott Aitchison here, former mayor from Muskoka, way down south. Scott is a member of Parliament. He's the Shadow Minister of Housing. He's coming up with real plans to make it possible to actually own a home again so that your 35-year-old can move out of your basement and finally get married and give you some grandkids. So he's doing a great job, and he's a man of great wisdom. He served in politics longer than me. In fact, when I first got into politics, I went to see him for some advice. I said, and at the time I was in my early 20s, and I thought I knew everything and probably speaking a little bit too much. And he said, Pierre, have a seat. He sat me down in his office, and there was a big stuffed fish on the wall. He caught it in the Muskokas, actually. And he said, Pierre, you see that fish up there? If he'd kept his mouth shut, he'd still be alive. So that's probably good advice for a lot of people going into politics. But sometimes you have to speak up as well. And now is one of those times. I'll tell you briefly about my story. I was born of a 16-year-old unwed mother, and she was too young. She just lost her mother to a heart attack. And so she couldn't raise me. She put me up for adoption to 2 school teachers. But they always taught me that it didn't matter where I came from. It mattered where I was going. It didn't matter who I knew, but it mattered what I could do. And that's the country I want my kids to inherit. That's my purpose in politics. But lately, it hasn't felt that way, has it? It feels like there really are 2 candidates. One where there's a privileged elite, born to wealth, connected to power, that's concentrating more and more riches in its own hands, getting rich by making everyone else poor. And we see the suffering in our streets right across this country. 40-year highs in inflation, food prices up, 11% year over year. These are not just statistics. There were 1.5 million people that walked into a food bank in the month of March. Some people walked in for food. One lady who's the CEO of the Mississauga Food Bank said she's been having people come in asking for help to get medical assistance in dying, not because they're sick, but because they're too poor and life is too miserable in Canada. There are reports of students living in homeless shelters in Canada. Our Veterans Affairs Department tells depressed veterans that they should consider medical assistance in dying, ending their misery. And speaking of misery, We see the tent cities that have popped up in towns across this country where people are hopelessly addicted to opioids, many of them dying of overdoses. 30,000 people in our country have died of opioid overdoses in the last 7 years alone. That's the hopelessness that people feel across this country. And instead of trying to restore the hope, we have a prime minister who divides to conquer, who tries to instill fear among his fellow Canadians in order to turn the majority against the minority. It's the oldest trick in the political playbook: divide and conquer. You ever hear him say anything good about this country? Geez, you'd think he'd be more excited about the nation he's led for 7 years, but instead, all he does is make excuses and blame other people for the way things are going wrong in his own country. But ladies and gentlemen, there is a lot of hurt in this country. My purpose is to turn that hurt into hope, to put people back in the charge of their lives by making Canada once again the freest nation on earth. That is our purpose. And that is what we do. We're going to defend the rural way of life. We're going to defend our northern communities. And it starts with axing the Liberal carbon tax, doesn't it? Yeah. And Charlie Angus doesn't agree. Charlie Angus is voting in favor of tripling the carbon tax in Timmins and all the way up to James Bay. What does he expect people? How many of you here drove in an electric car to get here today? Can you get around Timmins, James Bay in an electric car?
No.
And how do you heat your home out here? Right? This energy, this is not a choice. It's a reality. When you live in the country, in the north, you have big space to heat, long distances to travel, industries that require energy in order to operate and produce paychecks. It's not a matter of polluting the earth, it's a necessity to live your life. The way you protect the environment is by making energy alternatives more affordable, by producing more of the minerals of electrification here in Canada rather than importing them all from China, right? That's how you do it, but not according to Charlie Angus and Justin Trudeau. They want to triple the carbon tax and continue to drive up the cost of our rural people. You know, I'll tell you the story of a little greenhouse in my riding. Not that type of greenhouse. They grow tomatoes. They call them the Little Miracles of Manotick. Beautiful little tomatoes. But the Liberals charge them a carbon tax for the CO2 they release into the greenhouse, even though it's absorbed by the plant life. It doesn't even go into the atmosphere. So what's the consequence? It's more expensive to buy a Manotick tomato in Manotick than a Mexican tomato in Manotick, right? So the Mexicans don't charge the same carbon tax on their farmers. So the price signal tells the Manotick consumer to buy the tomato that had to be shipped by train and truck all the way across North America, burning diesel all the way, instead of buying the local produce made right down the street. That's what the carbon tax does, right? You know, and we see that right across our overall economy. We don't produce our own energy. We have the third biggest supply of oil on planet Earth, and yet we're importing 130,000 barrels because we can't get a pipeline from east to west. Meanwhile, in Europe, they fund Putin's war by buying his natural gas, even though we have 1,300 trillion cubic feet of the stuff right beneath our feet that we could be exporting to the Europeans and generating paychecks here in this country. You know we have massive advantages in natural gas. Why? Shortest shipping distance from North America to Asia and to Europe is right here in Canada. 2, you have to liquefy the stuff to get it on a ship. How do you do that? You cool it down. What do we have in Canada? We have cold weather, right? In fact, it was so cold in Ottawa the other day that Justin Trudeau was sitting with his hands in his own pockets. So anyway, here's the plan, my friends. I'm going to repeal the anti-energy and anti-development laws and replace them with simple, clear laws. that protect the environment, consult First Nations, but get projects built so that we can build natural gas liquefaction facilities, send that gas off to Europe to break European dependence on Putin, send it to Asia to close down dirty coal-fired plants, and we will transform dollars for dictators into paychecks for our people in this country. We will approve more mines, more logging operations, and more resource development so that we can have bigger and more powerful paychecks, that we can bring home our industry, and we can be a nation that stands on its own 2 feet and bows down before no nation, a self-reliant country. That's the country that we're going to build right here in Canada. And there's no greater self-reliance than the centuries of First Nations and other Canadians who have harvested nature for a substance and now use firearms also for legitimate recreational purposes. Now, we see Justin Trudeau waging war against rural people by trying to ban hunting rifles. You know, well, I wouldn't say that, but I will say this. Here's what I'll say. We're going to defeat this plan by voting Trudeau out and democratically and peacefully electing another government that will respect our hunters and our farmers. How many of the hunters around here in Timmins are going and doing drive-by shootings in downtown Toronto? Put up your hand if you're one of them. You know, 82% of the guns used in crime in Toronto, according to the cops, actually come smuggled across the border. But instead of protecting our border against gun smugglers, our Prime Minister, with the indirect help of the other opposition parties, are going after our legitimate firearms owners. This is going to be a monstrous, multi-billion-dollar boondoggle, targeting exactly the wrong people. I'll tell you something. If you randomly pick a group from the general public, someone off the street, who doesn't have a possession and acquisition license, they're probably more likely to be a gun criminal than someone who does. To get a possession and acquisition license, you have to be vetted by the RCMP. You have to be trained and tested. You have to have your families interviewed. You have to demonstrate a competence in using a firearm. And then you have to follow a whole series of other rules. People who go through all those steps don't tend to turn around and rob banks or shoot up their neighborhoods, right? These are the law-abiding people who feed their families. And when this bill, if it passes, they're going to spend billions of dollars sending police officers, knocking on doors of law-abiding people, trying to track down firearms that weren't even restricted before, and therefore they're not even in a registry. The government doesn't even know where these firearms are. Can you imagine how much money it's going to cost to try to track them down and punish the people who lawfully purchased them in the first place? This is a colossal waste of money. Meanwhile, they're allowing repeat violent offenders to go back out on the streets. The 2 killers in Saskatchewan that went on the stabbing spree in the First Nations community about 3 months ago, they had as many as 60 convictions for violent offenses, but were let out on the street. Recently, a young OPP officer was killed by a man with multiple convictions for firearms and violence who was out on bail. Bail that is now more easily provided to repeat violent offenders because of laws that Justin Trudeau has passed. So here's my plan. I'm going to cancel the hunting rifle ban. I'm going to use the savings to bolster our border, and we're going to toughen the laws for the repeat violent offenders to take the most violent people off the street and keep our people safe again in this country. That's what we're going to do. And we're going to use some of those savings as well to provide recovery and treatment to people suffering from addiction. We see our streets are now besieged by these addictions. As I said at the outset, 30,000 people. This is more than enough to fill an NHL-sized stadium, have died in 7 years alone because of opioid overdose. We know the story. A group of powerful pharmaceutical companies, with the help of slick consultants, including at McKinsey & Company, a liberal-linked corporation, they defrauded the healthcare system. They went in and sold North America, both the United States and Canada, on a bill of goods. It said these drugs are not addictive at all. They're totally harmless. All they do is relieve pain. So prescribe them widely. And our hospitals did. And right across working class North America, people who went in because they had a sore back were given this drug and said, don't worry, take as much as you like. And the problem was, they were very enjoyable, relaxing, soothing drugs to take at first. And then people got hooked. And they needed more and more and more. And those corporations knew exactly what they were doing when they flooded our streets with these drugs. And it has only worsened ever since. My government is going to go after these corporations in court. We're going to get massive multi-million-dollar settlements from them. We're going to make them pay for the cost of treatment and recovery so that we can help save the lives of these good people whose lives have been taken over by this addiction. We're going to open recovery and treatment centers where there will be detox services, where there will be medication, where there will be counseling, so that these people can take back control of our lives, and these mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers can rejoin their families and be successful contributing members of our society. That's what we're going to do. You know, everybody has a story in life, and I met a young lady today, actually, had a wonderful story. It started off difficult. She was a nurse, actually, and she did get injured, hurt her back, and she started taking OxyContin. She lost her family as a result of it, but she went into treatment, and she took back control of her life. She's been clean for 7 years. She's working at the local restaurant, contributing member of our community here in Timmins, a wonderful person who's happy and joyous and back with her family. It shows once again that there is always hope. We can turn things around and redemption is possible no matter how hard things seem. And that really is a story for Canada, isn't it? I know sometimes it feels hopeless these days. It feels like people are losing control of their lives, that there's forces beyond our control that are taking away from us the sense of optimism that we all had in this country not so long ago. Well, I'm here to say that we're going to restore that optimism. There's nothing wrong with this country that cannot be cured by what is right with this country. We rest not on a few years of bad government of Justin Trudeau, but on an 800-year tradition of freedom that built up from the common people, going all the way back to the Magna Carta, the Great Charter. The British commoners met in the fields of Runnymede and forced the king to sign that charter that reduced his power and brought in liberty under the law. And through much tension and much conflict over 8 centuries, the commoners have rose up again and again and again to remind the crown who is actually in charge. And that is the story of Canada, where the common people, at the end of the day, make the decisions for themselves. And that really is my purpose in politics, is to restore the strength of the common person, the common man and the common woman. You know, all the great stories of Winston Churchill, and there's so many funny ones. My favorite one is actually when there was the Blitz over London. Buildings were all knocked down. He would actually go out into the streets and help the rescue workers rescue people. And there was one lady, she was in her 70s, and she was captured under rubble. She'd been out getting her groceries. And he came over, and the rescue workers helped lift off the rubble and scrape away the dust. She stood up, she looked him in the eye, and she said, "I've got things to do." She picked up her groceries and she walked off. And Winston Churchill said, "There goes greatness." And isn't that the truth? Yeah. We look for greatness from our leaders. Our leaders are just people. We have the same vices and virtues as everyone else. The true greatness comes from the common people, the everyday people, the heroes, the moms, the dads, the workers over in that mine or in that forestry center, the people who do the work, that serve in our military, that serve on the front line of our police. These are the people who built our country. These are the people that I'm in it for. These are the people I'm proud to serve. And these are the people who are going to take back control of their lives in the freest nation on earth. In the words of the great Canadian Prime Minister John Diefenbaker, I'm a Canadian, a free Canadian, free to speak without fear, free to stand for what I think right, free to oppose what I believe wrong, free to worship God in my own way, free to choose those who shall govern my country. It is this heritage of freedom that I pledge to uphold for myself and for all of mankind. Thank you very much, and God bless Timmins. Great to be with you.